Yeah, I don't tend to have a regular routine. Since God told me to stop doing the Division Destiny stuff and stop journaling everything and just be and engage and enjoy the relationship. I've been doing that as soon as I get up and just enjoy engaging with God and just have time. And sometimes I get up and sometimes I stay in bed and just enjoy that first part of the day and just set the scene for the day and just sort of come into that state of being and rest and enjoy. And then, depending on what I'm doing in the day, I'll then, like today, I've got 5 sessions today. So, I'll then just engage in the spirit around those sessions and create the environment for those sessions to be whatever God wants them to be. And I'll have everything I need in those sessions. So I tend to just keep it fairly simple and have more of an intimacy of heart to heart with God, where I know his heart and I feel his heart and I can communicate, you know, pretty much all the time in that. And, and that's been very helpful then in finding a way of living which incorporates someone else into that, because in a sense I've been on my own for quite a long time. Even though I was married, I was still on my own in one sense, and now I'm not on my own. Then I'm finding how the rhythm of that sort of works out in everyday life. And and that's great, because I've put into practice all of the things that I've learned over the last 10 years into this relationship. And I've put into practice engaging with my spirit, engaging the heart, and seeing in the heart, and engaging all of that from a point of being proactive and intentional. And I've sort of paralleled relationship with my relationship with God and how God brought me into a place of intimacy, starting off in the dance, in the garden of the heart. And when I started to engage God in the garden of the heart back in 2010, very much it was he started to look into my eyes and look in me in the face, and just, I saw his desire for a relationship with me. I just saw his desire for intimacy, and that then set me on the journey, because I knew he had this deep desire for me to come into a level of relationship that I'd never been in before. And then I just continued to pursue. So I would lay down, in green pastures and lie by quiet waters and engage the shepherd of my soul and just open up my heart. And then I learned to grow my heart from planting the testimonies within my heart of, my encounters with God, and then beginning to be fruitful in my life. And then moving on to the dance floor and being entwined, and that sense of becoming one, where he is sort of hugging me, and there's a cardiogenosis, heart to heart, where I began to just know him and know Jesus, the Spirit, Father, in a deeper way, without me having to do anything other than let them hug me and give me this knowledge of the heart. And that sort of then opened up my destiny, because as I engaged who they were, they began to reveal who I was as a son. So sonship came out of that sort of place, and then destiny began to be revealed. But there was a lot still left to be done in our relationship and in my life particularly, to then deal with the things which were a hindrance to the future. So then I went through the soaking room, process of being prepared, purified, refined, dark cloud experience, separating soul and spirit. All of that was part of the journey to then the bridal chamber, which was then a whole different level of intimacy, of abiding in a level of intimacy I never really knew existed. And without being able to dwell and abide in the realms of heaven, only stepping in, stepping out, stepping in, stepping out, while I was tethered from soul to spirit, my soul just dictated where I was, unless God overruled. And sometimes, God would take me into a place and overrule, but my soul wanted to be in the realms of heaven, but they didn't want my spirit to be there independently, or not independently, but just my soul needed to be in control effectively. So once that soul and spirit was separated, reintegrated, I became quantumly entangled, and my spirit dwelt in the realms of heaven ever since. That took it to a level of intimacy that I just didn't really perceive when I was stepping in and stepping out. So that becoming one spirit and being joined to the Lord and having a level of intimacy of knowing not just the heart of the Father, but the Father's intentions and the Father's desires. It was such a deeper level of being able eventually to engage in the eternal heart of God, and eventually being in the light and in perfection and in that realm. All of that was part of that journey. And then God started to show me, this is not just a pattern for my relationship with you. This is a pattern for your relationship with others. So then I learned to engage my spirit. When I first entered into this relationship, I opened up my heart and I became vulnerable and decided to love unconditionally and engage my heart. And then I needed to create a safe place for this relationship to flourish. So I surrounded her with my spirit and engaged, and now opened my spirit to her. And this is the thing which I never really understood before. I'd opened my first love gate to God, obviously, and we had this intimacy within, but I'd never opened it to anyone else because I'd never really thought about it in those terms. So, and then going through this process of beginning a relationship, it caused me to then question, well, what is relationship from God's perspective? What is marriage from God's perspective? Is what we think marriage is from the religious tradition or from cultural, is that what God sees marriage? Because I've been married for 40 years and it didn't stop, the piece of paper and the vows we made didn't stop the marriage ending. When my wife decided to leave, then, the marriage ended. So I sort of had to say to God, well, I was in that place where, okay, this has ended. My relationship with God is amazing. My life is really good. Maybe I'm content with that. I just can't really think about relationships, to be honest. And I got to that point where, okay, I'll just settle for where I am. And then God spoke to me and said, well, that's a rather selfish attitude. And I'm like, what do you mean? He said, well, don't you think you could make someone else happy? Don't you think I have someone for you to become one with so you can make her happy? And I thought, oh, I never really thought about it like that, and so that changed my thinking. And then I was like, okay, God, I'm open if there's a relationship where I can make someone happy, love them unconditionally, them love me, and we being a relationship, great. But where is she? Right? Open up the heavens and drop her in my lap. Basically, I didn't know what to do. And I was a bit like, and God said, well, no, you need to be proactive, put into practice what you know how to do. So I started to release a frequency, a call in the spirit realm to the person that I could make happy. And that was my criteria. Who could I make happy? And I didn't have an agenda of, well, who could make me happy? I just was thinking about what God said. There's someone that you could make happy. So I started to, in the spirit, try to find that person and connect with them. Now, I didn't know how that was going to outwork, but eventually, God engineered the situation where eventually I met this person, and then was able then to look into her heart, because I could see what she was carrying. Our first meeting, we had this sort of deep conversation about how we both got to where we were. It was like pretty intense straight away. There was this, and it was quite comfortable in one sense because it was really easy to talk. And then I went through this thing of, okay, I feel, attracted to this person. I feel the frequency is good. What do I do? Do what God do? I can't pursue a relationship if I still feel married. Do you see me married? I asked God the question, do you see me married? And he said, no, you're not married, because your marriage ended when the covenant was ended, and your wife left and you came to the acceptance of that. The marriage ended from my perspective. So I felt, okay, I'm comfortable then to pursue a relationship because you've given me permission, because you don't see me as married. But then that caused me to ask the question, well, what is marriage? What is marriage from your perspective, God? And I said, well, is it the piece of paper and the legal thing? Well, that can't be just what marriage is, because you don't see me married and I've still got a piece of paper at the moment until eventually there's a divorce comes through. So I'm like, oh, so you don't see the legal thing as actually what marriage really is, although there's nothing wrong in that, but that isn't just it. So what is it then? So eventually, after a fair bit of conversation with God and talking about it, and it was like, it's the total surrender of two people to one another, spirit, soul, body. And I know some people talk about marriage, well, once you have sex with someone, then God sees you as married, but he doesn't, because that's just the physical, that's not the emotional and the spiritual. And without all of them, there's not a complete union and oneness. No, I never knew about the spiritual component of it. I knew God was in the midst of a relationship, the three-stranded cord thing, which they use in Ecclesiastes at marriage talks normally. But in reality, it's not a three-stranded cord. It's a nine-stranded cord. It's spirit, soul, and body of two people, and Father, Son, and Spirit being entwined. Well, that's a totally different concept. I knew about the physical union. I knew about the feelings, the emotions of love, being in love, and eventually sort of having feelings of love. But I didn't get the unconditional aspect of that when I got married. When I got married, when I entered into a relationship, as a 16, 17-year-old, my emotions were mixed with hormones and lust and everything else. I didn't even know I was. I didn't have an emotional maturity. I didn't know who I was, and I didn't really know my identity. I didn't know my destiny. I knew God to a degree, but and to a limited degree. So I was mixed up, confused with all these emotions and hormones. I didn't really know whether I was coming or going, to be honest. But I didn't know the spiritual component of it, and I didn't know how to love unconditionally. But I now do. So then I reached out, surrounded her with my spirit, created a safe place for her to be able to open up and become connected. And we had a day where we were in the gardens that I'm a member of, and we were sitting by the lake, and we looked into each other's eyes for about 3 hours, didn't break gaze almost, totally oblivious to anyone around us until we realized no one was left and we were probably much on our own. And I looked, it was my garden of the heart moment. I looked into her eyes, I expressed my desire, and I looked into her heart and I saw what she was carrying, and I knew she was going to need some nurturing and encouragement, because she was cautious and afraid that she wouldn't be able to love again, or be able to, therefore she didn't want to let anyone down because she didn't know whether she could feel love, having been on her own for 10 years. So this was quite an in-depth heart, and I chose at that moment to unconditionally love. And I opened my heart and I engaged my heart. And, I opened my heart up to her, and I wanted her to feel how I felt and how I was feeling. Now, there's a difference between unconditionally loving someone and a choice to feeling and falling in love. That's a different process. But you start with the unconditional love. I was never going to be able to give my heart to someone that I hadn't chosen to love unconditionally. So I did that. And then as I began to engage, God gave me a picture of a rosebud that was closed and needed the light of love to shine on it to open it. So I chose to engage and shine on that, on her. And then I began to engage with her spirit so that she felt safe, and she felt it. So she didn't understand, but she said, "What are you doing to me? I'm feeling you, and I'm feeling, what are you doing? You're getting under my skin in a good way. What's going on?" So I was able to share with her, look, I am engaging your spirit with my spirit, and I've opened my spirit and invited you in. My first love gate is now in, you are invited to participate in love in me. I had no idea about any of that. Obviously, before I engaged in God with that, I had no real understanding of that. But then I didn't really think about that as opening my first love gate to anybody else. So God so blessed me in that he restored the feelings of first love. I'd not felt that way ever because there was such a mixture of emotions when I was younger. I didn't really know what first love really felt like or should have been, and the sort of unconditional nature of it and the emotions of it and everything of it, and the spirit connection. I didn't really understand that, but now I do. And we became connected. And that then was, the garden of the heart, and then the entwining, the connection of spirit. And then we're going through a process of normalization, I guess, of discovering how to relate to one another, how to work through, the triggers and things you obviously inevitably have from previous relationships and hurt and things from the past, how not to, be triggered or to talk about it, and going through the process really of preparation for ultimately intimacy and complete surrender to one another, in which now we are processing that and outworking that in our relationship. And it's really amazing, the difference when you are connected spirit to spirit. And she feels me and I feel her, and no matter where she is. And I feel that care and concern for her that, was probably never really activated before. And it opened up a side of me I didn't really know exist, awakened me. The whole romantic side of me, it's like totally awakened in that I don't feel awkward about the emotions, sharing, talking, sharing how I feel, telling her how I feel about her. All of that just is totally natural because of a level of commitment and connection that, I just didn't know before. I didn't know how to do that before. And obviously it takes two. It can't just be a one-sided relationship. It's got to be a two-sided relationship. And, I then was focused on giving and giving and giving and giving. And I had this nervousness in my stomach, which I didn't, is that how you're supposed to feel? This sort of giddiness and nervousness. And, and I sort of lost my appetite. And it's like, well, is this lovesick? And all this sort of thing. I was just talking to God about what are these feelings, And, he sort of showed me that what I was going through was normal, but you have to get to the point where you feel trust and acceptance and not nervous that something might go wrong or any little fear thing. So, as I had been focused on giving, Father said to me, you need to learn to receive. So you've opened your spirit to let her in. Now let her in. Receive. You've opened your heart to her. Now actually let that happen, because I was too focused on giving and I hadn't thought about what she is releasing. And I'd opened my heart and opened my spirit, and I just felt completely different. I felt at rest. I felt at peace. I felt all of that sort of slight nervousness went. I did sort of, during that, our first, I lost a fair bit of weight because I sort of, just lost my appetite. I lost about a stone and a quarter of weight in a sense. But now I feel better physically, and I feel better emotionally and spiritually. And for me, the marriage then, as God sees it, he's looking at the heart and the connection in the spirit. Whether you have a piece of paper that verifies that, or whether you make vows before people, is not the issue. It's what you're doing before God that really counts. Because in the Bible, obviously, the New Testament gives nothing about what marriage is. It just really doesn't talk about a wedding. It doesn't talk about how you enter into a marriage. I think it mentions about leaving and cleaving as sort of you can't be single and married. You've got to be one. There's got to be a commitment to leave singlehood and become one in union. But there's no ceremony. There's no how you do it. And I think we've obviously developed over the years how to do things out of a mixture, I guess, of different things, and that has to be done for some Christians. Well, you have to be done in church before God. For some, well, it can be a civil thing, and then you do vows before God. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways of doing it. But God was really saying to me, none of that is really what it's about. And you could get a piece of paper and have never been committed spiritually or emotionally. You can just basically say the vows, get the piece of paper and the legal document, but it doesn't make you married is how God sees marriage. And that's how a lot of marriages fail, because they weren't really married in the way God sees marriage, as a complete union of two people, spirit, soul, and body. So it's been a bit of a deconstruction process of what is marriage and how does God view marriage, and then what am I going to do about the future? And, obviously I'll do whatever God shows me to do, but right now I'm just learning to be in that place of oneness and union, and be one, and to connect, and to find that place where, we're comfortable with each other, and just learning how to live together in a relationship, because long distance relationships are really difficult. Yes, I can connect, and I am connected. I'm quantumly entangled, but you've got to work it out in day-to-day practice. You've got to deal with the stressy moments, and you've got to deal with the nagging moments, and you've got to deal with the things where you're doing things together that maybe you don't really like, and that's life, that's marriage, that's relationship, so you can't do that without actually doing it. And I think part of the problem is that a lot of people enter into a marriage with this wonderful thought of what it's going to be, and they really have never really put in the groundwork of what relationship is. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. So I'm sort of splitting my time between home and here, wanting to spend time in the normal everyday type of life, eating together and cooking together and watching TV together, and just having a relationship, going out for walks, doing the garden, just being in that place where we're comfortable, communicating, and I guess I've never been happier, in any sense of relationship, or, just my life. I don't think, my relationship with God has not changed. That's still as it was, but I'm entwined in that relationship, and therefore I'm not independent or on my own. There is someone also in that relationship. So when I get up or when I awake and I engage God, I'm just not engaging as an independent person. I'm engaging in union with somebody else. So there's a difference, and there's a beautiful sense in that, that I've never really felt before. And I'm sure there's depths of it to go, and I'm sure there's a level of intimacy there which will become as we go forward, but it is wonderful. So my relationship with God is just as strong, but is actually more to it now, because I'm not just thinking about myself, or not just connecting with myself. So there's a difference to it. So that sort of is beautiful, and it's something that was unexpected, and something I wasn't really looking for, and something I wasn't, it wasn't even on my agenda, but God, it was on God's, and from that perspective, that I would want everyone to find this, and actually I've shared this with a number of people when I was in the US and things and stuff, and it actually, a number of them were like challenged to think, oh, I never thought about that myself. My husband died 10 years ago. I never really thought about anything. And so it inspired them to go back to God and just ask the question, do you want me to be on my own? And actually in this relationship, God spoke to her just before I contacted her to say, I don't want you to be alone for the rest of your life. So he'd set the scene for me to come into this person's life, by opening up their desire. No, it's a lot of work, that you have to do to make it feel, give the space for growth and the space for, communication and relationship and all of that. But it is, something I've just never felt before. at a level of intimacy that, you know, I've never really had before. Now that's not to knock anything of my previous marriage. It was what it was, with all the difficulties that we had in our relationship and all the things that we had, two people that didn't know how to do that. I don't think, you know, that was part of the problem. And we had a lot of issues, which contributed to, I guess, in the end, our unhappiness. You know, I'd settled, but I wasn't really happy compared to what I am now. You know, it's just no comparison. But I would want my ex-wife to be equally happy. I want her to find someone, to find that she can share her life with somebody in that way, and to be, you know, to find a level of relationship that she never had with me. You know, and maybe I was just not able to give her what she needed, and her awakening me that ability. I don't know. You know, don't want to be negative about the past, because, you know, we had 4 beautiful children and wonderful children, and we had a lot of good time together, and we did a lot of things in ministry together, which were extremely effective and valuable. Just in the end, our personal happiness wasn't there for each other. And I think God stepped in and intervened to give us an opportunity of being happy. I was pretty stubborn in that I wasn't going to give up, and I'd made this commitment, I wasn't going to break it, sort of thing. But actually, I think if I was really listening to God, I think he would have shown me that there was a different way. But in a sense, he showed my wife. So from that perspective, I wasn't very happy with it, obviously. But actually now God has brought good out of it. And I think God was in it all along, because God knew, what was his intention for both of us. And now I'm in this place where I am really, really happy and just enjoying life in a way that I've never really done before. And everything just feels more healthy and whole in every way, really. And it is a beautiful thing.
Mike, what you've talked about, at least what I'm from my side, what I'm hearing is basically your relationship with God over the time has gone into deeper levels of intimacy with God, because that's what God wants. And he wants that for everyone.
Yeah.
So now you're taking the same thing. You said it's almost parallel. I used the word parallel with you in this situation.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking of Jesus when he was on earth. God wants intimacy with the same levels of intimacy and deep level and even deeper levels that even you've achieved.
Yeah.
With everyone. So taking what you shared about Dale is the same with you, and not only you, but everyone else, with everybody that you meet. Not maybe to that level of intimacy, but so I'm just thinking as I listen to you, my level of intimacy with most people, other than Debbie, is somewhat superficial. Hi, how you doing? While they're answering, I'm not even listening.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously different types of relationship. You obviously can't have a marriage type relationship with more than one person, because it isn't enough of you to go round, I guess, more than one person. But you can have a level of relationship if you're more self-aware and willing to enter into an unconditionally loving relationship, in which then your motive for the relationship is for the benefit of the other person. Love in an unconditional sense. Freely we've received. Jesus said, new commandment I give unto you, love one another as I've loved you. Now, that obviously includes marriage, but it also includes friendship. It obviously includes loving the world. It includes creation. It's not limited. And I think, obviously, you can't have a level of relationship with everybody in the world. Not possible. But if we do have friends, family, there's got to be a level of connection in those relationships, which is an outworking of the relationship you have with God. And I'm not saying it's easy, because in some of those relationships, they may be broken, which means it's very hard if they're one-sided, or if there's damage from the past, or there's hurt, or other things that have happened in those relationships. That makes it more difficult, because therefore someone is not going to open up their heart to you because they feel hurt, or they might feel they're protecting themselves. we all have the ability to put up protection mechanisms to keep ourselves safe. But actually what it does, it locks us in a prison, which keeps us from connecting. But obviously you don't trust everybody to the same degree as you obviously trust God, because some people may have an agenda and you may have already been hurt by other people's agendas, which makes you somewhat careful about guarding your heart from being hurt and damaged. But you don't want to carry on that in life, which is why forgiveness is so important, because when you choose to forgive, you cancel the debt of the previous trauma or experience or whatever was done to you, in which you're asking God to heal you and make your heart soft again rather than hard. Because what happens generally when we get hurt, we harden our heart. We get trampled on. Our heart is trampled on by somebody and they harden the ground. It's like you don't plant seeds in the path that everyone's been walking over. You plant it in the cultivated soil that's ready and able to receive the seed and therefore enable it to grow. But a lot of us have, our hearts are trampled down from our past experiences, and therefore nothing really gets in because it's hard. Now, I think forgiveness and true forgiveness softens our heart again and then makes it able to be hurt again, which is like some people, I don't want to go there again. But at the end of the day, if you're not able to be hurt, you're not able to feel. So you can't love somebody to the degree that God wants if you're protecting your heart and afraid of being hurt, which is why I chose to love unconditionally and become vulnerable, even though I was opening myself up to the potential of being hurt. But I knew it was the only way. I couldn't hold back if I was going to be able to create a place and environment where this relationship couldn't grow and flourish. But I couldn't hold, that fear. Now, the other side of that is, that's eventually two people have to get to the point where they're equally willing to surrender at that level and love one another. When it comes to relationships outside of the marriage type relationship, then obviously there's different levels. I mean, if you see someone once or twice a year, the level of relationship you have with them is going to be sort of in proportion to the amount of time you spend. But there are people that I've spent a lot of time with in the past. I haven't probably seen, see once or twice, once a year sometimes. And when I see them, it's like we were never apart, because we have that bank of relationship deposited in the bank of our hearts. And therefore you get together and it just feels like, yeah, I saw you yesterday, and because there was that level there in the past, and now you're just living out of the deposit that's been made. But if we're going to love one another as he loved us, we've got to allow him to love us. So first of all, we've got to let our barriers down, to let God in and open up our heart and open up our spirit to God. Otherwise, we won't be able to receive unconditional love and therefore not give it. You can only give what you've received. It's love one another as I have loved you. I think in John's letters, it was, we love because he first loved us. So we've got to receive that love to be able to give it. And I think that's where a lot of people, because they have been hurt, because they've had their hearts hardened and trampling, and they still got the stones in there of the memories of what's happened to them, then it's difficult for them to be fruitful in relationships. They might be fruitful in other areas of their lives, but in relationships, the state of the heart is really vital in how we're going to produce good seed. And, that's where the 30, 60, 90-fold comes in. If the heart is hard and full of weeds and stones, then it's not going to be productive. And I think the state of our heart can be different in different areas. But in terms of relationship, if we're hardened, if our hearts are hardened and we're afraid of being hurt, then it's going to be difficult to actually be able to love people in the way that God loves us. And sometimes it's hard even for God to be able to get through to us because our hearts are protecting ourselves from hurt. So there's a lot of understanding needed, I think, of who we are and our past, and being able to come to the point of, my little phrase of living loved. Once you know you're loved and you lived in that state of being loved, then you can love living. Life takes on a whole joyful expression when you're living loved, and then you love living and you live loving. So you live in that way that you've received love by living in a loving way to others. That doesn't necessarily mean that they always receive it or that you always get it right, obviously. And sometimes, you know, if you're focusing in one relationship, sometimes you have to balance that out with the level you can put into other relationships. You know, and if you're going into a marriage type relationship and God wants you to become one, you know, you've got to focus your attention there. Otherwise, you know, there's only so much to go round, you know, and our capacity to love can definitely increase. But if you don't focus there, then you won't be able to come to that place where you are in union, in a relationship. And I think that's why sometimes, you know, you feel out of balance and everything is focused here right now, because that's where it needs to be focused. But eventually things come back, and then you get this sense where I'm in this relationship now, and now I also have other relationships that are also something I can engage with, but from a safe place of being in this relationship. And I think for a lot of people, they struggle with that type of, how do I relate to somebody, and how deep does that connection go? And I think there's a lot of factors involved in that, including the past and your experience and everything else.
As a rule of thumb, could it be said that my level of intimacy with, say, my partner Debbie or someone else is totally correlated to my intimacy with God, level of intimacy with God?
Yeah, I think so.
I can't go beyond intimacy with her than I can with God.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think some people have probably a more intimate relationship with their partner because they've never discovered intimacy with God. And of course, lots of people don't know God at that level at all. But ultimately, God, our relationship with God and what God is able to impart to us in that relationship is more than what anyone else can impart. And if you're looking for all your needs to be met in a person, they will never be able to fulfill what God's places in your life. They may love you and that might be wonderful, but God's got another level to it that was never designed for two people, but it needs to be in proportion and the same type of love, you know, the same unconditional nature and the same, you know, I feel in love with God. You know, I still have that emotional feelings of intimacy and relationship. It isn't purely, well, I know God loves me unconditionally and I love him back. I have the feelings that are more love type intimate feelings. And I feel how God feels about me. Now that gives me a place of security in which I don't need for somebody else to bring me that level of security. I am secure in my relationship with God, which means I'm focused on giving into a relationship. God is focused on giving into me. He wants me to then reciprocate in giving into somebody else. So I can then focus what I've received into giving rather than receiving. A lot of people want something. Their agenda for a relationship is they want to be loved. They want to be whatever, you know, whatever that relationship is, to be made safe, to secure, or feel special, or feel approved of, or appreciated, and all those things. And there's nothing wrong in, you know, our relationship with each other in having those things, but we could never do it to the level that God can. And if we're wanting a God level off from somebody else, we'll drain them dry, you know, and suck everything out of them. There won't be anything left. Because and some people do that. They suck everything out of because they desperately needy. Well, we need our needs met in God, and then the needs we have for each other is more about mutual, you know, relationship with each other out of our relationship with God. And I do feel what I've learned in my relationship with God, I've been able to outwork in this relationship. where I was never able to fully do that before.
Mike, the scripture, God will meet my needs. It actually, I've seen a lot of translations, God will be your need, singular need, is according to his. Does that need really mean then intimacy? That is our need in life, intimacy with God. And that is our number one.
Yeah, we are created with a need and desire to be loved and to love. Love really is the nature and character of the Father, Son, and Spirit relationship, in they want us to have with them, but also to have in a level with others, and particularly obviously with one person that we're spending our life with. Okay? But yes, I think the more intimate we are with God, the easier it is in relationship with others, or should be. But that doesn't take into account history or hurt or pain or jealousy or other things, because some people would be jealous of relationships that we have with God. You have to have a secure relationship with someone that they accept that God is going to be the priority in your life. If they want you to make them the priority, that is never going to work, because they will be jealous of your relationship with God rather than part of it. And that some relationships are like that. They want exclusive rights on somebody, but actually God has to become first so that we can receive the love to be able to give to somebody else. How can we give love if we've never received it in the right way from God? And it does have levels of intimacy which are the full level of intimacy. I mean, when you think about, when it talks about whoever's joined to the Lord is one spirit with him in Corinthians, it previously then talks whoever's joined to a prostitute is one flesh with her. And there's a sense where there's a parallel between that level of intimacy with a person and that level of intimacy with God. But obviously it's not sexual with God, but it has all the components of intimacy. And it can be very physical in that we can feel and sense the presence and love, and all of those emotional things can be part of it. But obviously with a person, it's designed to be spirit, soul, and body, and the physical aspect of that is part of the component. Without it, there is not a complete union. And so God does see the physical side as an important element, but no more important than the other elements. And that's where the danger is. Then you put more importance on one aspect than on the other, and then you get out of balance, driven rather than in the desire to be one and in union. Then for me, the spiritual and emotional components lead to the physical component. And the physical component is a product of the emotional and spiritual. It shouldn't come first. And I think some people, I talked to a few people recently, and they were talking about some of their friends' experiences on dating sites and things like that. And essentially, some people, they just want to know whether they're going to be physically compatible. And that is the most important thing to them. And actually, it shouldn't be. And therefore, that is the component they want to try out. And if we're not sexually compatible, well, this relationship isn't going to work. So we'll try that out and we'll see if it works. Well, they're missing a huge element where the spiritual and emotional leads to what is then a spiritual, physical, emotional union. If you don't have the spiritual and emotional, the physical can be selfish. And it may be somewhat compatible, but nothing like what comes out of an emotional, spiritual relationship, in which then it's just the outworking of the depth of relationship you've got and not the primary component. And it is an important component, obviously, because God has designed us to be physically intimate, and he's made us to be able to please each other and to bring us satisfaction in all ways. But you don't, it's wrong. That shouldn't be the beginning. That should be the end, or the culmination or the consummation of the relationship, spiritual and physical, emotional. Not well, this is what we're going to do first. And so, you know, in where I've gone in this relationship, I was not driving the agenda towards the physical because I wanted to have the intimacy of the emotions and the spiritual, which then would lead to us wanting to be close physically. So I didn't set the agenda to that. I was waiting because I knew where I felt, but I wanted to give a safe place to explore. So, you know, we didn't hold hands for like 3 or 4 meetings together because I was waiting for her to feel comfortable to hold my hand. So we didn't kiss until, you know, I waited until the time was right when she felt that was right. So, you know, and we've got to be careful we don't try and drive the agenda towards something. But the important aspect is that you're ready for that because you're already surrendered spiritually and emotionally. You know, and some people, you know, particularly with obviously young kids and whatever, they just want sex. You know, there's a huge difference between sex and making love. Making love is an outworking of the love that you already have for one another. Sex can be with 2 people who don't even know each other, who are just drunk on a date. You know, it's like, doesn't have to have any emotional or spiritual component at all. It's just a physical thing that some people do because that is what they're conditioned to think relationships are. You know, and I think the world promotes sex as the most important thing. And in reality, it is the culmination of the others things, which are more important or equally as important, let's say. You know, and I wouldn't want to say one is more important than the other, but I think the order comes, you know, emotional and spiritual come before physical, without doubt. You know, and a lot of people get into self-gratification within, you know, relationships because they've been pushed by the agenda of their peers or culture or societal things of, well, you know, the aim is how do you get sex? Well, the aim really is much more about, from God's perspective, how do you become one? That is not going to happen on the first date. I'm not saying you can't fall for someone and find someone very attractive on the first date, but you've got to come to a level of communication and relationship. You know, so for us in the relationship I'm now in, I was away for 2 weeks in the US, and at the time I thought this is bad timing, but actually it was not bad timing because we spent 2 times every day for that 2 weeks that we communicated, and sometimes up to 2 hours at a time. And we grew closer during that 2-week period, and we communicated at a level of everything and dealt with emotions because I was really missing her and moping actually for the first day or so. I was like, yeah, do I really want to be here? I want to be home. But actually, I learned to cope with that because then I then had to engage in the spirit and connect. You know, and our communication deepened and our relationship deepened. And then I came back for a day, and then she was off for 8 days. So it was like, oh, another week, you know. But again, we communicated every day, much to the annoyance of her friends who were like, well, why do you talk to him every day? Yeah. Well, because our relationship needed to know the test of being apart. And, you know, the level of relationship that came from that was to me very precious. You know, and I I journal. I'm journaling the relationship and my feelings and the sort of milestones of the relationship, because it's really, really important that I understand and I'm aware of what's going on and what's happening and where we are, and then, you know, how to resolve. You know, we've not really had any conflict. There's been a few stressy moments, but, you know, but not conflict and not arguments or anything like that. But when we do, or if we do, there's no reason why you have to, but you have to be able to handle that and know from a place of safety that you love one another. You know, and that didn't going to change because you have a disagreement or you see things differently over a certain thing, because with different people, you know, that we have different opinions and different ways of looking at things, and therefore you come to the acceptance of that. You don't try and change the person. You know, I say quite often, look, I've fallen in love with you. I don't want you to be someone else. You know, I want you to be you. You know, it's you I've fallen in love with. I'm not trying to change you. You know, and I don't want to change her. That's not the point of a relationship. It's mutually growing. And if change takes place, it's a mutual change that comes about through the relationship that brings about a closeness. You know, and so it's quite interesting just to, you know, at my time of life, you know, I didn't think I was going to feel this way or have this level of connection, in which for me it's like I'm sold out. You know, I've just given myself to it. You know, I'm not holding anything back, and therefore, you know, I'm happy to, you know, engage her life and, you know, be part of her life, which is easier for me, you know, because I'm not tied in certain ways. So it is really beautiful. And I think the more we do realize the spirit, soul, body connection and the connection with Father, Son, and Spirit, you know, the easier it is to realize what love really is and how that love is how God intends us to live. He intends us to live loved. Now, of course, that is knowing his love, but it's also knowing other people's love as well. He doesn't want us to have no one to love us. Now, ultimately, for some people, they never find that. Okay? And if they can find it in God, wonderful. But God doesn't want us to be alone, unless, you know, there is some purpose in it for someone to remain celibate or alone. Then that some people may choose to be a hermit, or that might be what they feel their destiny is. For me, I'd chosen it because I didn't really want the hassle, you know, of relationship, because I didn't really think about it that way. But as soon as God challenged me, I saw it immediately. It's like, oh yeah, why wouldn't I think I could make someone else happy? And I'm being selfish if I'm actually not being willing for that to take place, you know. And it's one of those things, you know, God just gets you sometimes, doesn't he? And you just think, oh yeah, you know. And then you go through the journey of unfolding it. You know, it wasn't easy, because I didn't know what I felt. I didn't know what God felt. I had to do quite a lot of talking to him about, you know, his understanding of, is my understanding a deconstruction of what marriage is, and, you know, our conventions, and, you know, why we have these conventions, and what is it really from God's perspective. You know, that was quite a in-depth process, because again, you know, I've been conditioned into believing certain things, like most of us have, without really having a God never told me any of that. You know, I just assumed, because that's what we all do, you know, in a sense. Well, this is what you do if you get married. Well, you go and do marriage preparation classes, and you go and get a wedding ceremony, and you get married, and you make vows, and you become man and wife, you know. And it's like, well, who said that's the process? Well, God showed me that he didn't say that was the process. Not that he's against that. In anything that brings two people together into a committed love relationship, he's going to be okay with. It's just, it isn't a rule. And God is more flexible about what love is and what relationship is than we tend to be. And particularly religious things tend to be, because they tend to have a very fixed focus of this. And God is not religious. And, you know, some of the things that we've done church-wise and Christianity-wise, well, we know very well that God wasn't in here. You know, therefore, I think we just got to be careful not to make judgments based on our presumption and assumption of what we think God thinks, but engage God for ourselves and find out, what is it that God thinks? And I was very careful to make sure that I wasn't allowing my emotions to cloud my judgment and discernment. So I was careful and slow and talking to God all the way through to make sure I was doing nothing that would hinder this relationship would also affect my relationship with him. So I was checking it out and ensuring that what I felt was truly okay. Because it's very easy to be swept along with emotions and convince yourself that something's okay, because you want it to be. But I made sure that each step I was reflective and aware and wanting to make sure, God, what do you think? I'm asking you to show me what you think. I don't want my understanding to be filtered and clouded by what I think or what I might want. What do you feel? What do you think? Show me. And so God did. And therefore I feel very comfortable with where I am with my relationship with God and where I am in this relationship, because God is in the midst of it.
Mike, when you said you sent out a frequency to meet the other person's, in a way, their needs or whatever, would you suggest, for example, with even your own children that are not right now attached, and other people, for example, again, going back to your own children, would you coach them and say, this is what you should do to meet the right person? And second part of it is, when you came up, because you'd sent that out, as soon as you crossed that path with that person in your situation, did you know that was the person?
I engaged with God and I released the frequency to connect in the spiritual realm, like I've done before with releasing a blue light and other things that I've done. I know what to do. I just never thought about doing it because I wasn't at that place where I wanted a relationship. But once I decided to accept what God had said and say, yeah, okay, I'm open for whatever it is and whoever it is, I didn't want to set an agenda of, I want this person to be this, and this. They've got to look like this. They've got to be this age. They've got to have this. Well, I didn't do anything like that. The agenda was someone I could love and make happy. So that is what I look to connect with. Now, there may be lots of people out there that fit that bill, but I wanted to know. So when I engaged the heart. I looked to see. And then when we talked, nothing affected how I felt. And ultimately, both of us have history. We both have past. Both of us would probably like to change quite a lot of our past, I guess, if you could, but you can't. So you have to deal with the past. And at that point, I felt the spiritual connection or the frequency. And I also looked at the things we talked about and felt resonating with it. I resonated with the openness and the honesty and the transparency of which we were able to talk on the first time we met. And the second time we met, that was it for me. Once I looked into her eyes for 3 hours and I saw and I engaged God and I saw what God was seeing and I felt my desire for this person to love them and for them to be happy, that was it. Now, I knew that that wasn't going to be reciprocated immediately because of potential fear and other things in place, which I knew I needed to create a safe environment for that to change. And although, you can look at time is relative. So we might have only known each other a few months, but what we've done in those few months is like what most people would do in a year of dating. We have connected at a level of intimacy, emotionally and communication wise. We've talked about everything. Still find plenty to talk about, but it's like we talked and talked and talked. And therefore, a lot of people who have the sort of dating and they're seeing someone maybe once a week or twice a week, they're not going to get that. Even when we weren't seeing each other physically, we were Zooming most days when we could. So we sort of had a intense few months, which feels to me like we've been together a long time. because I feel I know and sense and feel. But I knew I needed to create a safe place for that relationship to flourish. It's got to be an incubator for it. And I put my spirit around her to create that safe place. And she felt it. You know, that was the thing. It was very interesting. But I thought, what is she going to feel? And she felt it. She knew I was doing something. She didn't know what it was, but she knew I was doing something, and she really felt it because she was cautious, not wanting to hurt me, and therefore holding back, not wanting to go into this because she was scared that she wouldn't be able to reciprocate. Now she knew she felt my feelings. I wasn't hiding them. You know, she felt me. She felt, you know, and she knew I was probably somewhat ahead in the relationship, but not very far ahead. And it, you know, I created a place where she could become comfortable, to let her guard down and to think, you know, the caution. You know, it's like, okay, why are you cautious? And therefore sometimes I, you know, was talking to her head. And then I knew I was talking to her head. So I just said, look, I know I'm talking to your head right now. It's okay. It's all right. I understand why you're cautious. It's okay. I'm not going to ride roughshod over you. It's okay for you to be cautious. But you need to know, obviously, I'm not. You need to know that where I am. And she obviously, we had one occasion where I needed to really explain the difference between unconditional love and therefore falling in love and being in love, and where we were in our relationship. You know, no, I was falling in love at that moment. You know, and it didn't take long for me to really feel completely deeply in love. But I knew I needed to give her the space to be able to feel that herself. And I wasn't doing stuff to get her to love me. My focus was on loving her. You know, that's, I think, the key into relationships. There shouldn't be an agenda where it's driven by what we want or what we think we need. You know, God so loved the world, he gave. Love is primarily about giving, not about receiving. The receiving comes at a mutual giving. You know, when both of us give and both of us are able to receive, then there's a mutual flow. But it takes time. And you've got to realize that we're complicated and there are history and there's past. So I knew, and I feel very comfortable, but ultimately there's still two people, and we've still got to work through, you know, the process. You know, there's a process, there's a journey to be had. You know, ultimately that means becoming part of each other's lives. And, you know, I've told my children, and they're aware and they know. And, you know, she's told her children. And therefore then you start meeting each other's friends. Well, you know, for me, I'm going to spend my time here because ultimately she has a life here, which is, you know, she needs to be here for various reasons. So for me, I'm very happy, you know, to move to be with her, because that's, for me, not an issue. You know, it's not a problem. You know? Now, obviously, that's got to be worked out. You know, and you got to work it out, and you got to come to, okay, this is what this means. You know, and you know, we're at that point. You know, where we're discovering this is what life would be to be together. And you know, and I feel really, really happy, you know, to be here and to be where I am. And, you know, and I don't mind being here on my own, you know, like she's working tonight, she does caring, and she's working tonight, so I won't see her until tomorrow, you know, but I'm here. I've got 5 sessions of this to do today, you know, and then I'll cook my tea and settle down for a nice evening, you know. So, you know, you find how the relationship works, and every relationship's different because two people are always different. And you gotta have that sense of not trying to make it what you want it to be, but discover how God wants it to be, with two people becoming one. And of course, you know, you have to learn to think of the other person. You know, when you've been used to living on your own, or used to living, independently, then thinking about the other person first doesn't always come naturally. But that's where you work at that. It says, no, I need to think first of somebody else, not myself. Therefore, I'm willing to look at those things and want to do the things that she'd like to do. But then that becomes mutual. So you find this balance and rhythm where life just is, as it should be, I guess. That's what it feels like for me. Just feels like this is how it always should have been, and I just couldn't attain it before because I wasn't probably mature enough or knew enough about myself or relationships and God. It took me a long time to get to the point of where I could be intimate with God and know who I was as a son of God and know him as my dad. And obviously, I've written a book all about the journey of coming into father-son relationship, which was a long one for me and took a long time to get to that place where I now know my dad and I know who I am as his son. But yeah, it's a very interesting place, and I'm, full of joy and happiness, but also realistic and objective, and realize that you just can't expect everything to happen overnight. You've got to continue. Relationships grow. Journeys are to be had. It's not a download and a plug-in. That's not realistic. So yeah, everything's good. All right. Okay. Well, that's one. All right. Well, okay. I'll leave it there.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I count you as friends. We've been connected for quite a long time. I didn't want to. It's
Mike,
part
you
of
got my head spinning.
Well, it's part of my life, and I don't want to hide things. And I want to be obviously sensitive to people. There are other people involved, and I want to, I'm not here to try and be negative towards anybody else, but it is, it is something I'm learning and something I've discovered, which I think can help a lot of people.
Yeah.
Who might be in a similar position, who don't know how to connect, or even younger people who are maybe looking for a relationship and don't know how to have it, and to know how to engage your spirit and to engage your heart, is something that may be of value to people. So I don't want to hide it and keep it to myself. When it feels appropriate to talk about it, But we've known each other a long time, so
yeah, that's right, a long time.
So from that,
I know when I met Bill, God showed me his heart.
Yeah,
and that's what drew me to Bill, was God had showed me his heart, because at first we kind of didn't click at all, right? And God told me, he says, that's the man you're going to marry, and showed me his heart.
Yeah.
Well, we've been together all these years now, so God knew what he was doing.
He did. He definitely knew what he was doing, and sometimes, we think we know what he's doing, and it's actually us who's doing it, and that's when things don't work out as well, when we're operating out of our own understanding.
Yes.
And sadly, that's most people, really. Most people don't know what they're doing when they can't enter into a relationship or get married, and therefore, there's all sorts of fraught with difficulties and things that happen, sadly. And then people get hurt, and people get disillusioned, and people get upset, and all of the negative emotions that happen when something doesn't work out. I tried, for 40 years. Obviously, I didn't. It wasn't a short period, but in the end, it wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I accept that. And that's as much my fault as my ex-wife's fault. I'm not blaming her, and I'm looking and saying, well, at the end of the day, we didn't know, and I didn't know what I know now.